We're probably like 30 seconds early today. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Erudition Network. This is the Erudition weekly interactive Black History and Knowledge session. I am the host of that, Eddie Phillips. I am also the founder of the Erudition Network. If this is your first time watching the Erudition Network, we are a network that is trying to teach and inform people about Black history, our history, and also to provide knowledge on things that have often been cloaked or hidden within our history. Every Thursday, we are on at 5 o'clock Mountain Time, 6 o'clock Central Time for an hour to discuss whatever historical questions you have interactively, as well as provide some lessons and some teaching on some subjects, certain subjects in Black history. Uh, we last week had a great session where a lot of people came on, a lot of young people came on, and older people like myself came on and asked some extraordinary, fabulous questions, and really encouraged me in what we're doing here with this fledgling network. You know, for the last few weeks, it's been a struggle. Let's be really honest with you. Erudition has been kind of a struggle. We had a lot going on, and me personally, but I am so rejuvenated by what I saw and the questions that I heard last week. Um, we got to get better about putting out a little bit more advertisement, and I will do that this coming week. So, what I want to talk about today, there's so much to talk about that is going on right now for African Americans, for Black people. Um, and there are so many things, different avenues and places to go um, to start to discuss. But I am also hesitating a little bit as I'm trying to see if give it a couple of moments before others come on. But um, before I start on any subject, I would encourage you to please feel free, no matter what I'm talking about or what we're speaking about, feel free to come in and ask questions um, and to present some ideas, whatever crosses your mind. Maybe it's something that you, as a young person, that you've seen in school. Maybe it's some Black history factoid that you've wanted to ask about for years, and maybe you've not had the person or people who could answer it for you. Um, that's what we're here to do. And I didn't do it last week. I'm also going to provide a link in the chat again. So if you want to come on briefly and speak, on camera or without us seeing you, but if you want to click and actually get on the show and talk, we can do that also. Anyway, um, you know, there's been so much going on in the news. Last week I was looking and I saw I think it was Friday. I posted a post on our Facebook page, and I'm gonna click that now. And I was looking at the issues of what was happening with the uh, Haitian refugees and those pictures of white men running them down with horses. And it was so disturbing to me because I saw history again um, being just happening again. There are so many incidents, so many things that have happened in our past, and it seems like this cowboyish fixation of running people down, uh, uh, um, white racist authority, and I'm going to say that it is right racist authority. Um, deciding that they're going to do something to people of color. And when you look at those images, and I'm gonna load some of them up for some of you who may not have seen it, or may turn off the news. Some people do that. I understand with so much of the stuff that's going on nowadays, but I do want to share my screen and kind of touch on that, because it was crazy, right? That and what we were seeing in real time. And so let me share this. And you see these pictures, right? You see these pictures, and you're like, whoa. And I just went to Google just to show you, but you see how, um, people are being ran down, and they're all they're trying to do is to get into this country, or to seek refuge, and the just the lunacy of men, predominantly white, running you down with horses, right, and swapping at you with their reins. It's crazy. It is just completely insane, and chasing them. And then we say, well, Eddie, you're nuking this, right? You're making more of this than what this actually was. But I'm not, because last week when I got on to look at to talk about this, I just went in, and what I started to do is I just shared images. I just went on because I know certain parts of the history, and all I did was go on and share some of the historical images, right, that we've seen, um, like Carson Beach, right? A lot of us don't even know the history of that, right? But you see them chasing and running people down who were trying to integrate the beach. And this was in 1975. And don't let the guy in a turtleneck, the smile, fool you, right? This was barbaric again. People on the beach running these folks down. Um, you look at Birmingham, right? And you see this image of this person, um, again, on a horse, intimidating, right? And then we go back to our current images, right? So much of this um, is just history repeating itself. History repeating itself. And unfortunately for us, there are not a lot of people out here who go back and touch on that and try to speak to that. Earlier today, as I do every day, I go on and I try to modify my reading and try to do what I need to do, and take some time to learn some things. And I was reading through the slave narratives. There are so many of them out there, and I encourage you to go out and get you a copy of some form of the slave narratives. You may get Norman Yetman's book. You can do that. There are some that are online that are free, and I think I will drop that link in here. Um, but I was reading a part where a man named Benjamin Johnson, and understanding the slave narratives, ladies and gentlemen, is that when these people were interviewed, they were older. They were 85, 90, some were 105 or older. And God had given them longevity so that they could be here to speak to the history that they had lived through. And this one person, Benjamin Johnson, I was cracking up because he was talking about how when slaves, uh, when you would go to visit other slaves, say you had family or friends or whatever, and they would leave and they would go to other plantations. Uh, the threat of it, and he was talking about how um, what they thought was the the genial kind master, right? And it flocked me back to thinking also about what I just showed you. And what he talked about was you could go to these other plantations. However, if the masters caught you, right, then once they got you, they got you. That was the law. They could whip you. They can do anything because you were on their property. And so they would chase you down. They would run you down. They would do anything they could to catch you. Additionally, there were bounties on being able to bring a slave back that traversed on your property, um, to bring it back to the owner. Now the owner has to pay you for returning his property. So the law stated that this is crazy, that the slave, if he was caught, he was caught. But if he got away, right? And so what happened with Benjamin Johnson is that he said the slave owner tried to grab the other slave. He was visiting a friend, a female friend, and he tried to grab him. And he pushed the man down in the ditch and he ran. So the man jumped up, got on his horse and started chasing him. Well, he didn't know the backwoods like the slaves did, so he got away. And the man wound up getting hurt. I think he said he scratched himself on a tree or something like that. But he got back to his property. Now the man knew, from the master knew where he was coming from because of the area, right? So the next morning, when Ben Johnson was trying to saddle up his master's horse, this slave owner comes. And he said he saw him coming from a distance, and he told his master, he said, he coming to talk to you because he caught me last night. And the white slave master asked the slave and said, he caught you, but did he keep you? He said, no, I got away. Then he said, well, that's your game. You got away. His game would have been if he would have been able to keep you. So when the white man got there and said he was going to whip this man's slave, he told him to get off his property. You have no authority here. Now, what does that mean? Why am I saying all this to you? I'm saying this to you because this is the lunacy of supremacy, the craziness that happens with supremacy, and why people differentiate and play into these games. The master actually told him that's a game. I thought that was so profound. That's his game. This is your game. Thus knowing that none of these things that were going on should be going on. The issues of today. Last week I wanted to get into missing white girl syndrome, and we kind of talked about it briefly, and other questions came in, and that was good. I really enjoyed that. But that's another issue that's going on in our society right now, where we seem to have people who, it seems like every week we're getting calls now. That's how it happens in Colorado. But anyway, we're talking about oh, that's my son, like the Fox on game. Well, yeah, but if they get away, they get away. You know, that's just the truth. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying, we were talking about that, and I think we missed some of that. Um, but the thing is, we're looking at a society right now that is still caught up in some old um, mentalities that they can't seem to get away from or can't seem to shake, even though um, they've been found out. So when you see men on horses running down Haitians, when you see the media going crazy over a missing white woman, and you understand the history that Ida B. Wells gave us, and talking about how visceral white racist society, and I make that distinction, could be whenever a white woman was missing, and the loss, complete lunacy. Whole towns had been burned down because of uh, the idea of a white woman being violated, taken, raped, or whatever. Children, men, women, and children killed based on this fixation that we have. And because we are the descendants of our ancestors who created these systems and these ideas and these fallacies, they continue. And so, quite frankly, what happens a lot of times is we get people, even in the media, who, black, white, or whatever, know what it is, know what the situation is, and still go along with it. I remember several years ago, when Philando Castile was killed, there was another man named Sterling that was shot. And I remember during that time, there were about, uh, 3 or 4 guys, black men, who had been killed, and it was shown in the media back to back to back to back to back. And I was worried at the psychological issues that would infer, right? Because how long can black people see other black people killed on live television and it not affect you, whether you be old, young, or whatever? And a little after that, we had police being attacked, shot at, some killed, uh, because of that. Now, the media knew that these ideas would radicalize um, black people. They knew it, right? But they still desire to show that. And what we're looking at now, even to this day, is lynching, right? Those lynchings, those violations, they have meaning to us. They stay with us. And if you know your history a little bit, and most of us know some of the issues of the civil rights movement, we know those images that were shown on these old films that we see in our history books. It radicalizes you because as you get older, you realize, hey, wait a minute, why are they doing me or us or them like that? And so I am concerned when we look at these images and the history of these images, um, on television, and don't get it in full context, what we're losing and what we're actually gaining from that, what we're losing in our humanity and what we're gaining from it in a false way. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been talking for about the last 15 minutes, and I don't know how many of you are on here, but I any questions, any things that you would like to ask on the channel, um, I'm here for you to do that. Um, or I keep on talking, but I just uh, want to make sure that I'm opening up the floor to anyone and everyone uh, who wants to participate. Give me one moment. I don't know if I sent anything out to let anybody know that we are live. So give me 1 second. This is why advertising is so good. All right. You might see this. All right. Going forward. Um, One of the other issues that I wanted to talk about coming up here too, we seem to be having, um, I don't know, I don't, how do I phrase this? I don't want to sound accusatory, but we seem to be having this issue with our young people. propaganda. And I want to do a couple lessons on propaganda and talk about how it's affecting us. Um, I think we did something earlier about a month or two ago on Erudition about it, but propaganda in the black community is rampant, and it is causing us to harm ourselves, causing some of us even to a point of death. Lies, these falsities that are leading people down the wrong path. One example of that is recently when I when I was watching some of these challenges and people walking on crates and falling and breaking their bodies, and then I was taken back to remembering when drug dealers about 2 or 3 years ago, and you can go on YouTube or whatever if you choose to do that, who were filming drug addicted black people uh, doing that before it was a challenge and laughing. And then saying to myself, how did we go from that to having young, old, whatever, out here doing the same thing? Now, a drug addicted person was doing that because they're in a desperate state, in a desperate frame of mind, and weren't thinking correctly. But we had rational thinking people out here thinking that it was fun. And that's just an example of the propaganda that we've fallen into. Another one of our issues is this ideal of activism that is warped, and I'm going to touch on that too, because the activism that we see now. I'll give you an example. If you go out and you go look and you read about the Birmingham campaign, right? And you read about from Dr. I don't care whose book you read. There are multiple books out here talking about that movement. Dr. King lists a lot of things that he in his books about it, but you look at how those movements came about and how they were effectively utilized. How back then in the 50s, they got people together in churches, in groups. They even went to go, so it wasn't just the church people. We misconstrued that. The, Dr. King and other reverend, other ministers, other people also went to go into the areas of the people who didn't go to church. The pool halls, the bars, the local water holes, all of these places. They went in and they talked to these folks. And they told them that they were encouraged to protest. They were encouraged to have their voice heard. However, what they were not encouraged to do was to be violent, was to show up and cause problems or issues, not to be agent provocateurs, not to be used by the white establishment, the racist white establishment, to defeat the movement. And this was not just in Birmingham, this was throughout the entire civil rights movement of the 50s and the 60s. We've lost that. So often now we watch the protests and people show up at the protest looking exactly like the thing that the racist people tell others about us. Will you show up with gang signs on your arm and t-shirt ripped? Will you out here fighting, hustling, bustling, and bopping folks, and you're not even a part of the peaceful protest? You're just there to insinuate a riot. And what happens is that the movement gets lost. There is no movement. The word that word movement indicates that we are moving towards something different. Protest is only a part of the movement. The first thing is formation. You have to be able to form an idea, a plan, and go about that plan. So often I look in our young people who have all of the energy to go out and protest, but aren't being given the proper tools and understanding of what they're doing. And so what happens is that the protest falls flat. They wait you out. In the 50s and the 60s, Dr. King and the SCLC, SNCC students, all of the Urban League, NAACP, and it goes on and on. Not only did they protest, but they also met with the people in the White Citizens Council. They met with those folks in power to let them understand that, listen, we're going to protest and stop supporting your businesses and cause a huge disruption unless you sit at the table and talk with us about how to change what we're dealing with. For all of the protests that we've had over the last few years, all we seem to get out of it is the families get paid for any police killing. Here's the kicker though. If you go and you look, most cities have a budget already put in that allows them to pay for wrongful deaths. They just budget it out. They already assume that the cops or these people are going to kill someone and that there's going to be a lawsuit. So they put money aside in the budget for that very thing. John Anthony. A day ago, me and one of my brothers were talking about the Dust Bowl. And I'm wondering, since the Indians maintained the land, cattle, and crops for years without causing a major problem to the land and animals, could the Indians have factored in the Dust Bowl? What do you mean by factored? The Indians did factor in the Dust Bowl. It's a great subject. The Indians told, I'll deviate from what I was saying, the Indians were the maintainers of this land for thousands of years, honestly, right? The Africans who came over, right? The indigenous people who were who grew out of these cultures that came and visited the Americas, they kept the land. They understood the land. And so when we look at the Dust Bowl here in Colorado and Wyoming and certain parts of Mexico, when you look at what happened during the Dust Bowl, the Indians had warned them. They had warned the settler, right? They had told the settler that you do not want to do this to the land. But what happened was the desire for wealth, the lie, right? The lie of telling people to come out to the West and become wealthy. And so in those times, in the 30s, right, it was horrible. But let's touch something else there, Sean Anthony. When they created the Homestead Act, right, and they told settlers to come out to the West, they were told lies about what was out here. The land needed to be cultivated. The land needed to be taken care of. When the Indians were on the lands and they were their traditional lands, they did that. They kept the land. They didn't plant wheat and everything and do all. They didn't mess with the topsoil. But when they came out after the Homestead Act, right, after Manifest Destiny, after the idea, right, of World War I, right, because you're talking about 1920, 1910, 1920, 1930. What we saw was a depression also grabbed the country. But the idea of money became such a fanatical interest for people that they didn't care. And they no longer cared about what the Indian said. The Indian was on his reservation. This is our land. We're going to do what we want to do with it. And they caused those black death clouds. I'm going to touch on something else that's not very popular also with that. When we talk about 1910, 1920, 1930, we're talking about a time of heightened racial issues in this country. We're talking about a time in which racist whites were killing people of color. It wasn't just blacks, right? They were killing people of color. I like to believe that God will not be mocked. And that when you go in and you murder people, because that's what happened, there is going to be, you're going to reap what you sowed. And so much death happened during the Dust Bowl. Many people thought it was, if you go and you actually, there's documentaries, I think Ken Burns did a documentary on it. If you actually read about it, many people thought it was the end of the world. They thought that this was the end times and that it was the judgment of God. I'm not making that up. That was descending on them. The dust clouds were so heavy that in many times they actually reached the East Coast. They traveled hundreds of thousands of miles to reach other parts of the country to let you know what was going on in those areas. So when we talk about the Dust Bowl, that's huge. But let's remember what was going on at those times. Many weeks ago, we talked about we had that map of lynchings and murders. The other thing to consider with that also is that we're moving out of a time of slavery, sharecropping, Great Black Migration, because that was going on also. Blacks were leaving areas. And people were not taught, to be honest with you historically, when you have a people who take care of everything, they take care of your lands. When you read the slave narratives, which I was talking about a little earlier, and you hear the slaves say, right, this was around the time that when they were doing these narratives. They were 180, 90 something years old, and they were living still in the same areas, right? Some of them. But you will hear some of them say how their families left. They did not want to live in those areas anymore. And that the older people, 85, 86 years old, were taking care of their masters, their former masters, grandchildren, and children still. Because had they left them, some of them begged them to stay. They wouldn't have known what to do. They weren't taught those skills. But that's a great point, Sean Anthony. The Dust Bowl is just another part of some things that went on in this country, and there's reasons behind it. There are contributors to it. Great question. Oh, don't worry about it, Daniel. I'm glad that you actually joined us. Hey, what's up, bro? Glad you're here. Hey, Eric, good to see you too. You know, often our children are taught history and in the classes and in the different things. And I appreciate that my son asked that question because, and I hope I answered that question, Sean Anthony. If I didn't, please, further elucidate. But I just wanted you to understand that the Indians told those folks they kept the lands, right? They kept the lands. The slaves kept the lands. But if you don't listen, then this is what's going to happen. And they got pulled, a lot of those settlers got pulled into it because of the machinations of rich white folks, white racist folks who didn't care and wanted them to go out there. Questions, ladies and gentlemen, questions, any question. I don't care. I can go in history all day, but I like when we ask questions. Hey, Mike, everything is good every day, man. Every Thursday. Hey, even if people catch the and I know our schedules are busy. Even if you catch it later and you ask a question, I try very hard. My son helps me with that to answer any question, even if it's later. I don't expect that everybody can join. You say, what's the topic today? Well, the topic today has been a couple of things. But what I really try to do with the interactive is I try to keep the door open so that anybody can ask a question. Got a question about history? Hey, let's go into it. Let's talk about it. Are all racists Republican? No. Look, I have said this on many different occasions to many different people. It does not matter if you are a Democrat, if you're a Republican, if you are somebody who is an independent or just don't, it doesn't matter. If you have a racist view, if you are steeped in a racist mentality, then unfortunately, you you're going to be racist and you're going to have these mentalities. And it doesn't matter what party you're in. But I do believe, as we said last week, parties can play into racism because they choose a perspective and they further that perspective. Sorry about that. Something went wrong. Hey man, ask question. We're here. I'm still on here for another 25 minutes. So I'm open to any question that you have, whatever topic, whatever you want to go into, that you want to cover. I think you had a question a couple of weeks ago, um, Mike, about the 49ers. I think we were going to talk about that. We never really got back into that. Just trying to make sure I didn't miss any of you all. But this is the thing, Daniel. To further elucidate on your question, to Mike asks this question, um, we, if you go back in history, you go back long enough, it doesn't matter what party, right? Uh, you could have been a Jeffersonian. You could have been a Andrew Jackson. You these people had racist views, so it doesn't matter. Me and a buddy was sitting around talking about how we had to come in around the time the street lights came on. Do you think the notion of us coming in when the street lights came on? Yes, and that is a great question. Um, so years ago, we were down in Mississippi. We go down and visit, and I remember it wasn't even dark, but it gets dark down there in the South. And we were told to come in, and coming from the city, I'm like, man, it ain't even really dark yet. But the idea of having uh, black folks out in town or around uh, was dangerous. And we are the products, as I said a little bit earlier, of our ancestors, of our relatives. And so when we talk about the sundown towns, uh, people died, people vanished, folks traveled across the country. When we had the green books and they told us this is the places that were safe to stop, that wasn't done without a reason. So yes, children were told to come in. I remember Angela Davis, the activist Angela Davis, said that before everybody knew about Bull Connor worldwide, right? Bull Connor would get on and send messages to racist whites and police um, in town and tell them that they were going to do a raid on black on on black people. And she said the black folks started getting smart. So what they did is some went and bought two-way radios. They went and bought radios so they could hear when they was coming. So the idea, they was always coming after dark. When you look at the Deacons for Defense, which don't nobody really talks about, when you look at these more violent militant groups in the South who fought down in Louisiana, down in Mississippi, to keep the whites, racist whites, out of their neighborhoods, sometimes shooting guns and warning them because them cowards was drunk and would drive in, right? So when you go and you read about these cases, right? They made a movie about the Deacons for Defense, but it didn't do credit to what the Deacons actually did. They were the security force for Dr. King and several other activists that were down there. They were willing to lay their lives down because they knew that the KKK, the Klan, and the white citizens, that they were murderous. They were murderous. So, great question. Day, I saw your question. You said explain Tuskegee. What do you mean by explain Tuskegee? Are you talking about the the school, Booker T. Washington, his establishment of Tuskegee? Um, are you talking about the experiments? There are many things that went on with Tuskegee, right? So I just need a little bit more clarity on that. But yeah, we should do um, a show and really go into the idea of the sundown towns. I know one of my friends in the Navy had told me that a friend, that one of his friends had talked. She had talked to him about sundown towns. He had no idea of it. The Tuskegee experiments. So you're talking about the syphilis experiments. Um, so the issue with the Tuskegee experiments on syphilis is I truly think that, I hear that in the news a lot lately. Um, and the problem with that, with those experiments, is that people have a misconception, a misunderstanding. Um, the men who were used in the Tuskegee experiments already had syphilis. They already had it. Uh, the problem with the experiment was is that it started out initially as a way to help, but not necessarily to help us. What was happening was that coming out of the World War, right, more cases of syphilis had occurred, and it was found that blacks tended to be able to handle the disease, or they could live longer, right, from the disease. So as they was done in many different things in history, they decided to do an experiment to trace the effects of long-term syphilis on blacks. And the reason why it's a Tuskegee experiment is because Tuskegee was used because there were doctors and people at Tuskegee, black as well as white, who all went along with it. The problem was, though, is that when penicillin was found to be a suitable cure for syphilis, these men were not given the cure. The idea was that the experiment was worth more than their health. Not only were they not given the cure, but they were also allowed to go and further spread syphilis. They were given false information, and some of them were actually told that they were being given slowly a cure. So there's many different deep issues with the Tuskegee experiment, because when they did that, they basically left death on these men. Because let's think about it: long-term syphilis causes you to lose your mind, as well as have a physical effect on your organs, the way you think. If you want an example of that, look what it did to Al Capone. And it will eventually kill you. And so one of the things that wound up happening was these men had long-term effects. And then by proxy had put those effects on their wives. And then children were born with effects that were caused because the parents had syphilis. So the Tuskegee experiment was a horrendous thing, because it started out with an idea: how do we study syphilis to save white lives? Then it became, okay, we could cure them, but let's see what it actually can do, if it will actually kill these people, and what's the long-term effects. I will leave a book, a great book, and I believe there's a podcast on it too, that talks about the Tuskegee experiments. I'm all about you learning more. Yeah, that would be great. That would be great. We'll do that next week, man. We'll go into sundown times. I have no problem with that. Shot Anthony, since the Indians factored in different types of biomes, animals, and weather patterns, could they have been one of the reasons why people know the perfect time to harvest in the right environment to harvest plants, and along with the harm that could be done to the plant if one of the environment change? So, the benefit of living in a place for generations and upon generations upon generations upon generations is the idea that you start to learn the patterns. That the weatherman does the same thing, right? We use Doppler radar, right? And with the idea of the movement and everything, if you don't understand Doppler, right? But we also utilize patterns. We look at the pattern. Was 100 years ago, was it rainy on this day? And we mark that down. Booker, I was going to say, when you look at, I was going to say Booker T. Watch, but it's not. Let's talk about the Benjamin Franklin. Whew, had a mind flow there. That very rarely happens. Benjamin Franklin and Banneker, right? Benjamin Banneker. When you look at both of them, they created almanacs. Almanacs are no more than that. We're predicting patterns for planners and people like that. Banneker understood the necessity of having an almanac. Benjamin Franklin understood it too. But they both got their source information from the Indians. Benjamin Franklin was a huge advocate, is not really discussed in your history books, of American Indians. He lauded over their ability to predict the weather, over their or how they lived. It was so bad in the 1700s that people were leaving from colonial life to go live with what they called the savage, the Indian, because they enjoyed that life so much better. It was so freeing. And Franklin once wrote that a person who lives that life would probably never ever come back to living a provincial life. So when you say, did they focus? Yes, they did. And they kept the land. That's what I mean by them keeping the land. They understood those patterns. And that's why they issued those warnings and why they said the things that they said. Daniel, why are African Americans skeptical of the COVID-19 vaccine? I believe that a lot of it, what earlier, before a lot of you all came on, I talked about propaganda. I think some of it comes from the idea of the misunderstanding of the Tuskegee experiment and not really understanding that the experiment wasn't the fact of what they gave them, it's what they didn't give them. So it wasn't the fact that they received a shot or whatever. They were denied treatment. When you look at the experiments that have been done on African Americans, we don't talk about post-World War I, between World War II, when eugenics was huge and they were sterilizing black prisoners. And they were trying to prevent them and then trying to test if they could sterilize them and stop their ability to have children, with the idea that it would stop crime. It would stop them from doing things that many times were speculative. Was fallacy, had not even happened. And so when you see the idea of African Americans being skeptical of any vaccine, of all of the people other than the Indian, all of the cultures in this country, the African American has the right to be skeptical. He has the right. He or she has the right. Because experimentation has been done on them. When drugs were released into the ghettos in the late 50s, early 60s, so heavily, right, with the condonement of the federal government, we know this by COINTELPRO, right, to test the effects. And then not only did we put the drugs in there, then we waged a war against the African American and locked up fathers, strung out mothers, sisters, and completely decimated these families. Then you will understand that the experimentation on African Americans is huge, and there is a hesitancy to trust anything that the government will provide. I know how the government voting system works and why the third party cannot win. So why do people fall for such a trap, as it is a historical reason behind it, or a modern group thinks stupidity? Okay, I think what I get what you're saying is that why do people go for a third party? It's not an ignorant idea to go for a third party. What it is that if we don't understand that it happens, and Barack Obama said this when he was running for president, it starts at the ground level. If you're going to start a party and you don't have aldermen and city officials and state officials, and you don't have those people in the in power or put into a position to vote for change and difference, then what is unfortunately going to happen is that you're going to have two people in Congress that are for the willy-nilly party. Well, their vote doesn't mean anything when you have a huge group of Democrats and Republicans. If you don't believe that, you go back and you read your early American history and you understand why the party systems, why George Washington advised against the party system, because he felt that it would end the democracy. It would end the democracy because now you're giving people a A or a B, right? And not a free thought to decide based on what they want. But that's a good question. What did colorism look like during chattel slavery? So it's amazing that colorism has stayed with us so long. What colorism looked like during chattel slavery is pretty much what it looked like today. When you look at the mulatto, right, the light skinned or lighter, non-dark African American, they were treated better. They could get in more places. Sometimes they could escape and pass for white. So the light-skinned black wasn't always trusted. And it is because a lot of the darker African Americans felt, right, that they were trying to be something that they weren't. It is almost the same as when you look at colorism is a huge thing all over the world. When we look at the Egyptian, you realize that the Egyptian and the Ethiopian in the Bible, in ancient history, right? The scribes of history always referred to the Egyptian and the Ethiopian as the same. They were all dark-skinned men. The Bible refers to them as the same. We played this idea of color, right? Because of the intermingling, because of the arrival of whites and the lightening of the skin. But the African, the Moor, right? These people didn't care, right? Back in those days. It was only became an issue when blacks were mitigated or put down worldwide as slaves, as chattel. And once you become someone else's possession, they have to justify it. So the justification was that you're not human if you're black. I'm not making that up. You're not human. And anything that comes out of your body is property. Just as it would be with my cow, my dog, my sheep, my goat. And so once you have that mentality that I'm not like them, right? It's easier to think that anything that is like them is not like me. And it becomes a divide that still stays in the black community to this day. And it can be looked at that way. But let's look at the Bull Moose Party, right? Let's look at Teddy Roosevelt. Let's go back and look at that. Teddy Roosevelt broke from the Republicans, and because they would not support him running for president again. And when he ran against Taft and Woodrow Wilson, one of our most racist presidents, he started the Bull Moose Party, right? Or there are other names, but we'll stick with the Bull Moose, right? We won't call them the populists. But basically, what he did was he understood, he turned Republicans into his party. If you cannot take a large section of these parties to fall into your party, then you're not going to have a significant difference. So I won't say that it's like doing nothing. It's just that you better have a foothold in some other forms of government, state, local, right? Teddy Roosevelt didn't have that, and Teddy Roosevelt lost. He came close. He's the only third party candidate to ever come close enough, but he still did not win. You have to start at the ground level. Good questions, guys. Good questions. Keep it going. Just making sure I didn't miss. No, I think we answered this. I think we answered this last week. Look, Johnson was not necessarily a racist, but he also was not necessarily non-racist. I think toward the end of his life, he was what Lyndon Johnson understood was poverty. He understood what it meant to be poor. He understood what it meant to be without. But Johnson also had he was from Texas, so he had Southern thoughts, right? And he was never different than using the N word and calling someone a nigga. One of his black advisors said that during some of the riots in the '60s, Johnson told them when he sent the National Guard down, he told them to go down there without any ammunition. Put them out there without ammunition because he didn't want nobody seeing the world. And what he meant by that was the Russians, right? Was the Chinese, right? With the communists. He didn't want nobody being able to say that they were shooting nigger women and babies. Now, why did he say that? And I use that term because it's exactly what he said. Because he understood that if we are shown throughout the world killing people of color, innocent people of color, that will open us up to the same assault that the Germans had. And he wasn't trying to do that. You had to win hearts and minds back in those days. Good question. Coming up on the last couple of minutes, I'll give you guys some more questions and some more things out here if you want to. Mike, so we were talking, and I'm going to touch on this briefly. We'll probably revisit it another time. We're talking about the 49ers. We're talking about the genocide that was caused by the 49ers, and most people don't notice. And we're talking about that because of the football team, the 49ers, right? And everybody was so caught up in this idea of the Redskins and all this and that. But nobody was looking at the fact that the 49ers are named after the California Gold Rush, where they killed about 16,000, if not more, it's believed to be more, Native American Indians, California Native American Indians. And that the fact that when they killed them, not only did they kill them, they killed their children. They stole their children. They maimed their children. Documented history of them actually going and killing young indigenous boys and cutting off their sex and using it as a change purse for their gold. It is a horrendous genocide that many don't talk about and many of us don't know. But folks were so caught up, and I understand the whole thing with the Redskin football team, but not thinking about the fact that 49ers team is named after bigoted, murderous racists. And what you will find with racists throughout history, you will find that a lot of them, they want you to know what they did. They name things, they do things, they put up monuments, they put up stuff to show you and remind you of who they are. Rather it be the Confederate flag, rather it be a statue, right? Rather it be a law, something to let you realize, rather it's the team name, right? Something to remind you of what they're doing. All right, Dave, I guess yours will be the last question. How do you determine if someone is racist? So I think I talked about this many times before, but I'll say it again. Race, you can be bigoted, right? You could be biased. You could be implicitly biased. But a racist, A racist is a person, that uses something, that bigotry, that bias, that ethnocentrism, all of those things against you to hold you down, to stop you from being duly equal to them. When you see someone doing that, you will know that they are a racist because they don't want you to succeed based solely off of your race, your color, your culture. All right, Shadat, I guess you were the last one. A while ago, I was attending a class and we learned about the food processing system in Chicago, a book by Upton Sinclair called The Jungle, which hints of racism in the book. As such, I'm curious as to how many reporters and people with power could have been influenced by racism whose stories, books we still learn about today. Okay, that's a great question. You learn about so many writers, and I'll go over about a couple of minutes. You learn about so many writers. Upton Sinclair is considered to be this progressive, this guy who was open to other cultures and things like that. And The Jungle is a book that kind of touches on that. I would suggest that you read a book also called Native Son, right, which speaks to on the black side of that. But one of the things about these books on racism and bigotry and how things work was also the idea of how America didn't work, right? Sinclair, the guy you're talking about, was a communist. He believed in communism. And the idea of that he wanted to push in that book was that people are forced into a system because of, in the jungle, because they were immigrants, right? And Native Son is because the black man, right, bigger, was put into a situation where he didn't have too many prospects in life. He had to work for his family. So when he was put into a situation where things could be a little bit better, he didn't know how to respond. And then there were devices and people that were there to hold him down. When they tell you to read these books, you have to read it with an open mind. And you have to understand that those stories still will resound with you. They will stay, they teach us a lesson. They talk to us, even beyond the author's life. The Jungle is a good book, but it also shows you racism. When Sinclair writes in that book that black men, that they were scared because black men were allowed to walk around the meat factories in Chicago with long blades and knives, and hint at the threat of white women being raped and killed and murdered. Now, this is a progressive, supposedly open-minded man, but he was still afraid of that Negro. So you have to see what you can do. Got to see what you can do when you read, and you got to really read into it. All right. This was a good session. It started slow, but this was a good session. I do appreciate everybody who answered the question. I hope that folks who watch this will leave questions, even if you watch it late, even if you can't make this the 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, please leave a question. Give us an idea of what you want to hear about, and so I don't have to sit here and bloviate for an hour about something that is not of interest to you. I want this to be interesting to everybody, and I want us to be able to provide you with knowledge that you may not have. But ladies and gentlemen, this is really a really great session again. Thank you for supporting the Erudition Network. Thank you for sharing our content. Thank you for liking our content. I do see those who come on every week, like Daniel. Thank you, Daniel, for coming on. Again, see you again next week. My nephew, I saw you on here asking questions. Both my sons were on here. I saw my wife's brother on here. I appreciate every one of you, and I want you to learn. People, this is not about my ego. It's about us trying to learn together. That is one of the things that I write in every advertisement for the Erudition Network. But I'm going to check on out of here. But I will thank you all, and I will see you next week. Hey, give me some ideas of what you want to hear next week. But until next time, until the next show, until we see each other again, God willing, you all have a blessed and beautiful week, and I thank you for tuning in to the Erudition Network. Have a good one.